What's up, everybody? It is I, TevinElChopo. Friends call me Chop, and we are back with another review. This time, we are talking about the new DC animated show, Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos is the new DC animated show and the first of the many DC projects under the new head of DC, James Gunn, who is also the head producer and writer of this show as well. Now, as far as I know, this show is supposed to lead into a live action Creatures Commandos movie that we should be getting sometime eventually in the future. But nevertheless, the show is connected to the new continuity of the DC cinematic universe that is not including any of the Zack Snyder films, but will somehow include certain things that James Gunn had already produced for DC, specifically the Suicide Squad movie that he directed. I have to make sure to say that because this show is a somewhat direct sequel to that Suicide Squad movie, taking place in the aftermath of not only that, but also the Peacemaker show that DC also produced along with James Gunn. And the show follows Rick Flag Sr. Yes, Rick Flag Sr. as Rick Flag Jr. was in the Suicide Squad movie, but spoiler alert, he died in that movie. So his father is tasked by Amanda Waller to lead up a new quote-unquote fake Suicide Squad that isn't necessarily the Suicide Squad, but it's kind of the Suicide Squad, but it's all creatures instead of actual human beings this time. Kind of confused about the logistics behind that, but who cares, I guess. Now, along with Rick Flag Sr., you also have the Bride, aka the Bride of Frankenstein, G.I. Robot, Weasel, Dr. Phosphorus, and Nina. Nina is the quote-unquote fish girl of the group as well. And they are initially tasked to go to a European country to save a princess who is in danger from Cersei. Cersei is a evil Amazon. Her existence does in fact hint at the fact that Wonder Woman is somewhere in this universe as well. So they're always tasked with going to the nation of Pakistan to save the princess from Cersei, with various hijinks along the way and a various amount of twists and turns as well. So some of the things that I liked right off the bat from this show is the voice acting, with Viola Davis reprising her role as Amanda Waller. We also got Frank Grillo playing Rick Flag Sr., Alan Tudyk, who is also not a stranger to the DC universe with his various roles, playing Dr. Phosphorus. You also have Sean Gunn playing G.I. Robot, and Indira Verma playing the Bride. I think my biggest surprise was David Harbour playing Frankenstein. He also does a really good job in the show as well. And I think the show does a great job of not only setting up these characters, but also giving them enough backstory for us to truly care about what happens to them throughout the course of the show. Two major highlights for me were the backstories for G.I. Robot and the backstories for Nina the Fish Girl. I'm gonna keep calling her the Fish Girl throughout this review. So if she went by any other name other than Nina, please let me know. I also thought the backstory of Frankenstein and the Bride was done very well, especially since those are characters that have been done a million times over in the public domain. So it's quite interesting to see the DC take on those types of stories. Also, I think that the character design was also done pretty solid. I personally had never heard of the Creature Commandos before this point, but I think the show does a good job of distinguishing them not only apart from each other, but also apart from the Suicide Squad that we saw in the previous movie. The only thing that really confused me about the character designs was Dr. Phosphorus, because he looked a lot like Blight, the villain from the Batman Beyond animated TV show. I'm pretty sure they're not the same character. I'm pretty sure Dr. Phosphorus came before Blight, but I'm not entirely sure. Nevertheless, Dr. Phosphorus was a good character in the show and distinctly different from Blight in the Batman Beyond show. So I definitely didn't take anything against him for that. Now, with the things that I did like about the show, there were some things that I didn't particularly care for. For instance, I think that the continuity for this show versus all the other DC projects that have come out in the last 10 years or so is still a little convoluted in my personal opinion. I think if James Gunn was going to come and completely start over from scratch, he should have completely started over from scratch, which is what I like to believe is going to happen with the new Superman movie that should be coming out real soon. With the trailers that have been coming out, it looks like we're going to be starting over scratch in that regard. But with the Creature Commandos essentially being a pseudo sequel slash spinoff of the Suicide Squad movie that was also attached to the previous DCEU, but it wasn't at the same time, it just makes things more confusing than it already has to be, especially when you're casting some of the same people like Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, and even with Frank Grillo playing Rick Flag Sr., not Rick Flag Jr., who passed away in the movie. We're still essentially connecting ourselves to that movie and essentially connecting ourselves to Peacemaker, because Peacemaker was also a spinoff of that movie as well. But again, all these things were from the previous regime of DC, and I kind of wish that this show was a starting over point versus a pseudo sequel situation, if that makes sense. Now, to be clear, you don't have to necessarily watch the Suicide Squad movie or any previous DC project to enjoy this show at all. But me being someone who's seen a majority of the previous DC projects up to this point, I kind of wish that they started over fresh. Similar to how they're doing the My Adventures with Superman TV show that I also did a review for, that's in a completely different continuity from any of the previous DC projects. I kind of wish that this was also disconnected from the previous projects as well, but I consider that to be a minor gripe at best. Also, I think the overarching plot of the show gets a little convoluted once we get to a certain point. Now, the overarching plot is essentially the Creature Commandos protecting the princess from Cersei, and then they succeed at the mission, and then essentially the mission gets flipped on its head as the show goes on, and it kind of just becomes like a back and forth type situation that I think makes it way more convoluted than it really needs to be. I think the best moments of the show were flashbacks anyway, so all the things that were happening in the present day didn't have to be super complicated. Also, I did bring up David Harbour playing Frankenstein in the show, and as much as I enjoyed David Harbour's performance, I don't particularly care for Frankenstein's character in the show, mainly because he's just a stereotypical toxic male throughout the entire show and a stalker. And I'm not a fan of either one of those tropes in life in general, let alone TV. So while David Harbour did do a good job portraying the character, I just don't really like the character, or at least the way he currently is in the current state of the show. Maybe as the show goes on or when the movies come out, his character changes. But as of right now, I can't say I particularly care for him as a character. Also, like I said before, with a lot of the best moments being the flashbacks of the characters' backstories, I don't think every backstory was as interesting as all the other ones. Like I said, I think Nina, the Bride, and G.I. Robot had some of the best backstories on the entire show that definitely made you empathize with them as characters. I think Weasel's backstory was fine. I didn't really bring up Weasel too much throughout this review so far because he's kind of a nothing character aside from his backstory. Dr. Phosphorus was also just okay at best in my opinion. And Rick Flag Sr. doesn't even get a flashback at all. His whole thing is essentially that he is a replacement for his son, and he eventually bangs the princess, which leads to a bunch of events throughout the rest of the show that I don't want to particularly spoil here in this review. But I think it made it hard for me to care about Rick Flag Sr.'s character throughout the show as well, because he didn't have a flashback and because he doesn't really do or say anything super intriguing or super relatable or even interesting in my opinion. And like I said, with the narrative being a little more convoluted than it should have been, the exact villain of the show is a little undefined. Like essentially Cersei is the villain until she's revealed to not have been the villain, and then it gets more convoluted from there. Like I said, I don't want to reveal too much about how the show goes, but it is definitely a convoluted situation in my humble opinion, a lot more than it needed to be. And there are plenty of moments throughout the show where it doesn't even feel like the characters even care about their objectives, especially the bride going to her old home towards the beginning of the show. So I think if they told a more concise, straight through story, it would have been a lot more entertaining. I think the twists and turns during the present day storyline doesn't necessarily do anything for me, or at least not as much as the backstories of the main characters through the flashbacks that they portray throughout the show. Now, I also think that the animation was done pretty well overall. Also, the comedy was overall pretty solid as well. There were some moments that I didn't find super funny, but overall I did get a good laugh out of at least one moment out of every episode. So I consider that to be a success. So yeah, overall I think the Creature Commandos show was pretty solid. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I was definitely very hesitant going into the show, especially with this being somewhat connected to the previous DCU but not connected at the same time, and with this also being attached to James Gunn's upcoming works for the DC universe. I definitely was questioning about how well this was going to be, especially with how it's going to go with things moving forward. But I think it was a good start overall. It definitely makes me more excited for what James Gunn does in the future, specifically the upcoming Superman movie that's going to be coming out. Let me know if you want me to do a review of that movie when it comes out in the comments. And it also just makes me intrigued about where these characters are going to go moving forward. So if you are a fan of the DC universe, or if you're a fan of DC animation, or if you're just a fan of James Gunn in general, I definitely think this is something worth watching. But hey, these are just my opinions. Have you seen Creature Commandos? What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like it. My name is TevinElChopo. Friends call me Chop, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.